First thing he felt was a smell, sour and heavy. That was the fish that was incorrectly too little salt and too warm place storage. He knew that smell. 12 years in food logistics teach how to 100 shades of rot by one breath. The second thing he felt was pain. His was on fire. My bones were as if they had been put back in, not into that order. My throat tightened with every breath. He tried to open his eyes and couldn't. My eyelids stuck together from dried sweat. He tried to lift his hand and couldn't. My muscles didn't obey. Somewhere nearby, somewhere was crying. Quietly, almost silently. That was how children who are already tired of crying and simply can't stop. He gathered everything that was left in this strange, broken body and peeled open eyes. The light hit painfully. The ceiling had blackened beams, the walls made clay. A mattress made straw under my back. Next to the earth floor sat a girl, 10, thin, her cheekbones protruding, her eyes huge and empty. She stared at him, and tears streamed down dirty cheeks. She didn't wipe them. She didn't blink. She just stared and cried. He tried to say something, and from my throat came only a wheeze. The girl shuddered. Her widened. She leaned back, then suddenly rushed toward him and clung onto his hand with both palms. Her fingers were as cold as ice. She said, "He couldn't, the words." His tongue was familiar, but the words went by my mind. Then the meaning began to emerge, like a signal from the static. Brother. She called him brother. She said that he wasn't breathing all night. What was he had died? That she had prepared a book to cover his face. What she didn't know who to call because that my mother died in the winter and my father was taken in the sea. He listened, and inside his skull, slowly, a picture. A stranger's body, a stranger's life, a stranger's sister. The older son of a fisherman, fever for the 3rd week. He had die, but instead death he Han Jun. 34 years old, chief director of the house which supplied products to 600 restaurants in Seoul. The latest thing he remembered was the steering wheel, the road, the 3rd sleepless night, the contract with a new network. They closed for a second, then a blow, then nothing. Then that smell. He closed his eyes again. The first rule of management. Don't think about scale. Think about the next action. Next action. He looked at the girl. Min A. The name came from somewhere, from depths of this body, as if the former owner had left a note. Min A. Sister. 10 years. He looked at her hands. Her fingers were swollen. Her fingers cracked. Nails are bluish. Deficiency iron. Protein. The child went alone a single day and not 1 week. He slowly sat down. My head spun. The walls started spinning. He pressed his palm against the dirt floor and waited it out. Then I stood up. His legs gave way. He grabbed the wall. Clay crumbled from my fingers. Min A jumped up and put her shoulder. He leaned on the 10-year-old girl, and that was humiliating and necessary at the same time. The hut was tiny, 1 room, a hearth in the corner, a shelf above the hearth. He hobbled over to the shelf and examined what was on it. A clay pot with a handful of millet, half a head of garlic, a piece of dried mackerel wrapped in a rag. He unwrapped the rag and sniffed the fish. Dry, tough, but clean. It had been stored properly. Probably the only food in this house that had been stored properly. He looked at Min A. She was standing by the wall, staring at his hands. He understood. They'd been saving this fish. It was a reserve for a worst-case scenario, for a funeral the girl had been waiting for every day. He squeezed the mackerel between his fingers and made a decision. There would be no funeral. He found a second pot, cracked but intact. He scooped water from the wooden bucket by the door. The water was murky. He let it settle while he built a fire. The hands of this body were weak, but remembered the movements. Flint, dry grass, a spark, smoke, flames. He set the pot over the fire. He crumbled the millet. He broke the mackerel into small pieces and tossed them into the water. He peeled the garlic and crushed 3 cloves with the back of the knife. The knife was dull. He remembered that. Wild ginger grew near the threshold. He'd noticed it while peering out over the water. He sent Min A to pick a root. She darted off and returned 10 seconds later. He sliced the ginger into thin strips and tossed them into the boiling water. 20 minutes later, the hut smelled different. Garlic, ginger, hot broth, the scent of fish. Not rot, not disease, not death. Food. Mina sat by the hearth, her nostrils flaring. He poured the broth into a clay bowl. The millet had settled at the bottom like a murky porridge. The fish had fallen apart and given up everything it could. He handed the bowl to Mina. She took it with both hands. She blew on it, took a sip, and closed her eyes. She ate without lifting her head, in small, eager sips. The broth dripped down her chin. She didn't notice. When the bowl was empty, she looked up at him, and in her eyes was something he hadn't expected. Not gratitude, not joy. Fear. She was afraid this would be the last time. He crouched down beside her. He placed his hand on her head. Her hair was stiff and tangled. He told her there would be food tomorrow, too, and the day after tomorrow as well. She didn't believe him. He could see that. But she nodded, because she wanted to believe. He straightened up and walked to the door. He pushed it open. Light flooded into the hut. The village lay before him. A dozen or so huts along the shore, the gray sea. Boats pulled up onto the sand, nets drying on stakes. It smelled of salt and seaweed and something else. Hopelessness. He looked at this village and saw, not poverty, not filth, not despair. He saw a warehouse, a route, 3 transshipment points. The shore is a resource. The sea is a resource. The fish they catch here and don't know how to preserve is a resource. The salt they harvest by the handful and use haphazardly is a resource. The people who live and die of hunger here, in the middle of a sea full of food, that too is a resource, if you know what to do with it. He leaned against the doorframe. His body ached. His head was spinning. He's 19 in this world. He has no money, no connections, no name, no strength, no magic. He has 12 years of knowledge that doesn't exist in this world, and a girl behind him who, for the first time in a long while, had eaten a hot meal today. That's enough. He pushed off the doorframe and walked down the path toward the shore. His legs buckled. He kept walking. Near the nearest hut, an old woman was drying seaweed on the rocks. She looked up and stared at him. The fisherman's son, the one who was supposed to die. Here he comes. He nodded at her. She didn't nod back, she just stared. He reached the shore. 3 fishermen were mending a net. They looked up. One of them spat. The second turned away. The third, an old man with a weather-beaten face and gnarled fingers, looked at him for a long time. Then he asked why he had come. Ji-eun replied that he had come to look at the fish. The old man snorted. There were no fish. The last catch had been 3 days ago, and half of it had gone bad because they hadn't had enough salt. Ji-eun asked where they stored the salted fish. The old man pointed toward a shed by the dock. Ji-eun walked over to the shed. 4 barrels stood under the shed. He opened the first one, and the smell hit him in the face. Rottenness. The fish lay in brine, but the brine was weak. He dipped his finger in and tasted it. There was a third less salt than needed. The temperature was too high. The shed faced south. The sun had been baking the barrels for half the day. He opened the second one. Same thing. The third, worse. The fourth. This one could still be saved. He turned to the old man who was walking behind him. The old man looked grim. Jiun said that 3 barrels were ruined. They needed to be poured out, the fish buried. The old man flushed red. This is food. Winter is coming. We can't throw away food. Jiun said, This isn't food. It's poison. If anyone ate this fish in a week, the village would be holding a funeral. The old man fell silent. He knew the young man was right. Half the village had been suffering from stomach aches after the last batch. But to throw away 3 barrels of fish in the midst of a hungry winter, it was unthinkable. Jiun crouched down next to the 4th barrel. He pulled a fish out of it. He examined it. He sniffed it. The flesh was still firm. The smell was sour, but not rotten. Fermentation had begun, but wasn't complete. It could be salvaged if he salted it heavily and stored it in the cold. He asked the old man if there was a cellar in the village. The old man said there was, under the village headman's house. Jiun said, Lead the way. The cellar under the village heads turned out to be a pit, 2 on 2 steps, depth up to chest deep, earthen walls, wooden lid on top. Inside it was cool. It wasn't cold, but noticeably cooler than outside. June went downstairs and touched the wall. Damp clay. The temperature was even. The sun doesn't reach here. This can be used. He crawled and looked at the village headman. The village head, Pak, was standing beside him, short, sturdy, in his 50, his hands like tree of a tree, eyes suspicious. Standing stood an old fisherman with the pier and 2 men from the village. They were watching at June as a madman. The fisherman's boy, who 3 weeks had been on the verge of, and now walks and tells them how to salt fish. June knew how it looked. His didn't care. He turned to village head and said that 4th barrel needs to be moved here. Take. Add salt to taste, each piece with salt again. Then place back and pour fresh brine, strong brine. The village head asked where he knew how salt is needed. June looked around. He found on shelf a bowl, a small one, with the size in size. He said that this bowl of salt on here, this bowl of fish, 1 to 1 by volume. The village head said that it was too much. What salt is expensive, that they and put as they can. June replied that they put a little, and that's why the fish goes bad, and then they lose and the fish and salt. The village head opened his and closed it. He didn't think about it that way. No one in the village didn't think about it at all. They salted at the eyes just their grandfathers and grandfathers, their grandfathers' grandfathers. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. When it worked, they said that the spirits of the sea were angry. Jiun didn't argue with the spirits of the sea. He simply said that if they did as he said, they could salvage enough fish from the 4th barrel to feed the whole village for 10 days. 10 days. The village elder looked at him, then at the barrel, then back at him, and nodded. They worked until evening. Jiun demonstrated. The women and the elderly did the work. His body was too weak to carry the fish. He sat on an upside-down bucket and explained. Take out every fish, rinse it in clean seawater, dry it off, slit open the belly, remove the entrails, fill the cavity with salt, layer them in the barrel. Fish, salt, pour brine over them, cover with a wooden ring, weigh it down with a stone, put it in the cellar, leave it alone for 7 days. He spoke all this in an even voice, just as he used to speak to the trainees at the warehouse in Ichon, calmly, clearly, step by step. The old woman who had been drying seaweed that morning stood nearby and listened. Then she said that her grandmother used to do it that way, a long time ago, when the village was still prosperous. Then they forgot. Jiun nodded. They forgot because there was no one left to remember. Knowledge fades when there's no one to pass it on to. By nightfall, the 4th barrel was standing in the cellar, properly salted. The 3 rotten barrels were emptied outside the village. The fish were buried. The smell hung heavy in the air. Several women were crying. Food. Rotten, yes, but food. They were used to having no choice. Jiun didn't try to comfort them. He said that tomorrow he would go to the shore to watch them fish. Village head Peck walked him to the hut. He stopped at the door. He looked at Jiun for a long time. Then he asked how he knew that. Jiun replied that he'd seen it in a dream, that when he was sick, an old man had come to him and shown him. The village head snorted. He didn't believe it, but he didn't argue. He walked off into the darkness. Mina was waiting inside. She hadn't slept. She was sitting by the extinguished hearth, holding an empty bowl with both hands, as if it still held the warmth of that morning's broth. Jiun built a fire. He found a little millet. He cooked porridge with water, watery, almost transparent. He divided it between the two of them. He ate slowly. His body craved more. For 3 weeks his body had been dying from fever and hunger, but he knew he couldn't overload his stomach after such a long fast. Small portions, often, otherwise his body wouldn't be able to handle it. Mina finished her portion and looked at his bowl. He gave her the leftovers. She didn't refuse. In the morning he went down to the shore. The fishermen were heading out to sea in 2 boats. He stood on the pier and watched. They returned around noon. The catch was meager, a dozen or so fish, small ones. Jiun examined each one. Cod, flounder, a few mackerel, 2 fish he didn't recognize. He asked a fisherman what they were. The man gave him the local name. Jiun nodded and memorized it. Then he asked to be shown where they cleaned the fish. They led him to a flat rock by the water. There were traces of blood and scales on the rock. Guts lay scattered nearby, right on the sand. Flies buzzed. Jiun looked at it and clenched his jaw. Guts, heads, bones, fins. They threw it all away here. In his world, fish heads and bones were used to make broth. The guts were turned into fish sauce. They boiled down the fins and skin to make glue. Nothing went to waste. Here, half the fish ended up in the sand. He crouched down and gathered the guts into a bucket. The fisherman looked at him as if he were crazy. He carried the bucket back to the hut. He separated the liver from the rest. Fish liver, iron, vitamin A. Min-A needs to eat this every day. He pan-fried the liver on a stone with a drop of fat. He added wild garlic. The smell wafted through the village. Min-A ate with her eyes closed. Then he took the remaining innards, the bones and heads, and put them in a pot of water over low heat. By evening, he had broth, thick and dark. He poured it into a separate container and let it cool. The broth set, a good sign. That meant it had enough gelatin. It could be stored. It could be diluted and reheated. 3 days of hot meals made from what the village had thrown away. He sat on the threshold of the hut and watched the sunset. The sea turned red. The wind carried the scent of salt. Somewhere in the village, a child began to cry. Not Min-A, another one, a stranger, a hungry one. He closed his eyes. He'd spent 2 days in this world. He'd saved 1 barrel of fish. He'd fed 1 little girl. He'd made broth from scraps. Scale. Don't think about scale. Think about the next step. The next step. Tomorrow he'd talk to the village headman about salt. The village stood on the seashore. Salt in the sea was free. It just needed to be evaporated. He knew how. Clay pans, the sun, the wind. 3 days. If the village has enough salt, the fish will stop rotting. If the fish stop rotting, there will be a surplus. If there's a surplus, they can trade. If they can trade, Min-A will stop going to bed hungry. A chain. Simple, logical, like a delivery route from the pier to a restaurant. Only instead of a restaurant at the end of the chain, there's a skinny girl with empty eyes. He opened his eyes, got up, went into the hut. Min-A was already asleep, curled up on the mattress like a kitten. He lay down beside her. His body ached. The fever still lingered in his bones. Tomorrow would be tough. The day after tomorrow, too. He closed his eyes. In Seoul, he'd slept 4 hours a day and lived on coffee and kimbap from a vending machine. There's no coffee here. There are no vending machines here. Here, there's the sea and salt and fish and a girl who wakes up every morning to check if he's still breathing. That's enough. He fell asleep. On fourth day, Ji-woon took the village head Peck to shore and showed him a patch of flat rocks south of the pier. The stones stretched for 20 steps, smooth, dark from the sun, warmed so that bare foot couldn't stand. He said that here you can extract salt. The village head looked at him, then at the stones, then to the sea. He said that salt is from merchants from Taekwon. They always bought them. Ji-woon asked how a sack. The village head named the price. June asked how many bags the village buys per season. The village head stated the number. June multiplied in his head. 1/3 of the annual income of the village went on salt, and the sea was in 50 steps away. He explained, I need flat trays, wide ones with low sides. Pour some water, place the stones. The sun and the wind will take care of the rest. In 3 days the water will go away, and then there will be salt. Coarse, with impurities, but it's for salting. For food, recrystallize, dissolve in a small amount of water, strain through a cloth, boil down again. Then it will clean white salt. It's better than from the merchants from Taekwon. The village head remained silent for a long time. He was a cautious man. 30 years at the head of the village taught him not to believe to words. But he saw the rescued barrel of fish. He saw the broth made scraps. And he saw that the fisherman's boy was saying as if he'd netted 1,000 times. He nodded. 2 days it took to the pallets. Potter in the village was one, an old man. His hands were trembling. But I knew. June explained to him shape, flat, wide, the rim in 2 fingers. Gonchar made 4 pieces. They're a little crooked, but they work. They were put on display on rocks and flooded seawater. June came twice a day. He checked the level. I checked it color. On 3rd day, on first tray the crystals, rough, gray, but salt, real salt, free. Mina stood next and watched. He gave her a crystal from her finger. She grimaced, then she laughed. He didn't remember if she had ever before. Maybe it was the first time. He had even 6 pallets. Then he placed 8. By the end of the first week, there was producing more than it consumed, for the first time in decade. A surplus. A small one, but real. June put away the excess salt into a bag and put into cellar, the first batch. Now fish. With salt in hands, you be salt properly. He gathered the women in the village at the shed at the pier. 17 women, from young girls to old women. They'd all been salting fish their whole lives. They all did it differently. Ji-woon placed 2 bowls in front of them, one for salt, one for fish. He demonstrated. This much salt to this much fish, no more, no less. Gut the fish completely. Rinse it in seawater, pat it dry with a cloth. Salt it in the shade, not in the sun. Pack it tightly, no air pockets. Air is the enemy. Air causes rot. One of the women asked why they had to gut the fish. They'd always salted them whole. Ji-woon replied that the intestines are the first thing to rot. The intestines spoil the meat from the inside. If you remove the guts, the fish lasts 3 times longer. The woman looked at him as if he had revealed the secret of the universe to her. They worked all day. Ji-woon stood nearby, making adjustments. More salt, an even layer, pack it tighter. By evening, 3 barrels stood in the cellar, salted to standard, all identical. He marked each one with charcoal, the date, the quantity, and the measure of salt. Village head Pak stood nearby, looking at the markings. He asked why. Ji-woon replied that in 7 days they would open all 3 and compare them. If everything had been done correctly, the fish would be the same in all 3 barrels, equally good. The village head grunted. He didn't believe it was possible. 7 days later, they opened the barrels. The fish was identical, firm, clean, with the right aroma, no rot. Village head Peck tasted a piece. He chewed slowly. He put down his chopsticks. He looked at Ji-woon, and he bowed. Not very deeply, briefly, but he bowed. To a fisherman's boy in the village. Everyone saw it. Now Ji-un could speak, and people listened to him. He took advantage of this right away. The next morning, he asked the village head to gather the villagers. Everyone came. 32 people, not counting the children. He stood before them, thin, pale, barely able to stand, and he spoke. He said that the village wasn't dying from poverty. The village was dying from losses. They catch fish and lose half of it. They buy salt at triple the price, even though the sea is nearby. They throw away bones and offal that could feed people for a month. They work on their own, even though together they could accomplish 3 times as much. He spoke simply, in short sentences, like at an office meeting. Only instead of managers, standing before him were fishermen with weather-beaten faces and women with cracked hands. When he finished, there was silence. Then the old fisherman from the pier, the very one who'd first led him to the barrels, said that it was all well and good, but winter was coming, and in winter the sea gets stormy, and there won't be any fish. And you can't evaporate salt on the rocks. What then? Ji-un nodded. A good question. He replied that this was exactly why they needed to act now, while it's still fall, while the sea is still yielding fish, while the sun is still warming the rocks. They needed to stock up, not for a week, for 3 months. If salted properly, the fish will last through the winter. If they make enough salt to last, it'll be enough until spring. If they dry seaweed and mushrooms from the forest, they'll have something to add variety to their meals. Winter doesn't kill those who are prepared for it. Winter kills those who leave things to chance. He fell silent. The village fell silent. Then village head Peck stood up and said that the fisherman's son would tell them what to do, and they would do it. Not because they believed him, but because barrels don't lie. It was said quietly, but it was enough. For the next 10 days, the village worked. Ji-un drew up a schedule. In the morning, the fishermen went out to sea. In the afternoon, the women salted and dried. In the evening, everyone would sort through the supplies together and prepare the trays for salt. The children gathered seaweed and wild herbs. He could barely stay on his feet. The fever returned every evening. Heat, chills, sweat. Mina sat beside him and placed a wet cloth on his forehead. He'd fall asleep and see Seoul, the office, screens, spreadsheets, routes on a map, red and green lines. He'd wake up and see the clay walls. He couldn't afford to be sick. On the 12th day since he'd woken up, a man came to the village. A merchant from the neighboring village of Hamni, a 4-hour journey north along the coast. His name was No Sang-gil, thin, nervous, shifty eyes. He went to the village elder and said he'd heard about the fish, that in this village they'd started salting fish in a new way and it didn't spoil. He wanted to buy some, 20 pieces. The village elder looked at Ji-un. Ji-un stepped forward. He looked at the merchant. He asked what he needed it for. No Sang-gil hesitated. Then he said that food was scarce in Hamni too, and that if the fish really didn't spoil, he could sell it further north to the village of Cochin, where there was no sea at all and people saw fish only once a month. Ji-un listened, and a switch flipped inside his head. A chain. Their village catches and salts it. Hamni transports it. Cochin buys it. 3 villages, 3 links. He told the merchant he'd sell it, but not 20 pieces, 50, and not for money, for salt, and for iron, any iron, nails, staples, arrowheads. But Sang-gil opened his mouth. 50 pieces was a fortune, for salt and iron. He rubbed his chin. Then he nodded. 3 days later, he returned with a donkey. On the donkey were 2 sacks of salt and a bundle of iron staples. Ji-un counted out 50 pieces of properly salted fish. Each piece was the same size, the same saltiness, the same quality. But Sang-gil took one. He bit into it, chewed. His eyes went wide. He said nothing. He took the fish and left. A week later, he returned. He was with 2 others, from Cochin. They wanted more. People from Cochin were two, the man and a woman, the husband and wife. His was Yun Tae Ho, strong, quiet, the hands of a farmer. They was Yun Bora, little, quick. She said for both of them, they came because the fish that brought. But Sangil didn't, in 5 days on the road. In Cochin, there is not had seen before. Fish from the coast always came to them half rotten and stank so that the dogs turned away. And this was sturdy and clear. Their village stood in the valley between two hills, a river, rice fields, not sea nor salt, but they had rice and beans and mountain radishes that grew on the slopes like weeds. Jiun listened to them and asked for more details. Bora spoke for an hour. Jiun listened and memorized everything. A map took shape in his mind. 3 villages, their village on the shore, fish and salt, Hamni in the middle, a transit point, Cochin deep inland, rice and vegetables, a triangle, simple, beautiful. It worked. He proposed a deal. Their village would supply salted fish and salt. Cochin would supply rice and beans. Hamni would transport goods in both directions. Everyone gets what they lack. No one pays with silver. Barter. Fish for rice, salt for beans. Yun Tae Ho was silent. Bora looked at her husband, then at Jiun, then back at her husband. Tae Ho asked one thing. How much? Jiun gave the figures. He'd calculated them overnight. He sat by the light of an oil lamp, sketching with charcoal on a piece of bark. Minei slept beside him. He calculated distance, time, weight, transportation losses, storage times, exchange ratios. He didn't guess. He calculated, just as he had calculated routes for 600 restaurants. Only simpler, much simpler. Tae Ho listened to the numbers. He looked at his wife. She nodded. He nodded. They shook hands. The first cooperative of 3 villages. But Sangil became the transporter. Tae Ho and Bora became suppliers from the land. Jiun's village became the supplier from the sea. The following days merged into one long day. Jiun worked, he taught, he calculated. He barely slept. His body ached, but he forced it to keep moving. Every morning began with an inspection round. Trays of salt, barrels in the cellar, the shed at the pier, the nets, the catch. He kept records, clay tablets. Each one bore a date and numbers. How much fish they caught, how much they salted, how much they lost, how much salt they produced, how much they spent. Village head Pak looked at the tablets and shook his head. What was the point of this? They'd managed their whole lives without records. Ji-un replied that without records, you couldn't see the pattern. If you don't keep track, you don't know whether you're losing or making a profit. You just feel like things are going badly and don't understand why. Peck fell silent. A week later, he began asking for the numbers himself. On the 14th day, the first truly dangerous incident occurred. A boy from the village, 12 years old. His name was Sonu. He ate a fish from the first batch that had been salted the old way, the one Ji-un had ordered to be buried. His mother hadn't listened. She dug it up, washed it, gave it to her son. By evening, the boy was vomiting blood. Ji-un found out and ran over. His legs were buckling, but he ran. The hut reeked of vomit and fear. The mother was in hysterics. His father stood as white as a sheet. Sonu lay on the mattress, his body racked by convulsions. Ji-un wasn't a doctor, but he knew about food poisoning. 12 years in food logistics, he'd seen it all. First, water. Lots of water. Clean, boiled. Keep giving him water until the vomiting stops. Second, no food. His stomach needs to clear out. Third, ginger. Brew it strong. Give it to him in small sips. Fourth, don't let him lie on his back. Turn him onto his side so he doesn't choke. He gave the orders. His mother followed them. Father held the boy. The night was long. By dawn, the vomiting had stopped. Sonu had fallen asleep. He was breathing evenly. Ji-un sat against the wall, shaking. Not from the cold, from what he realized. If the boy had died, the village would have blamed him, the one who ordered the fish to be buried, the one whose order had led the mother to dig it up in secret. Logic doesn't work when a child dies, only anger and grief do. He stood up, went outside, found the village headman, told him what had happened. Beck turned pale, then his face hardened. He gathered the villagers, stood before them all, and said that the fisherman's son had been right. The 3 barrels were poison. He ordered them to be buried, and he was right to do so. Those who disobeyed nearly killed their own children. Shanu's mother stood in the crowd. She was crying, not out of shame, but out of fear. She had nearly killed her son because she couldn't bring herself to throw away food. Because hunger is more terrifying than rules. Ji-woon understood this. He didn't blame her. He walked over to her, looked her in the eyes, and told her he understood. That hunger drives people mad, and that it was his job to make sure she'd never again have to choose between the rules and a bite of food for her son. She cried even harder, but differently, not out of fear. He turned away. Minnie was standing at the edge of the crowd, small, serious. She was looking at him, and there was something new in her eyes. Not fear, not hope. Something in between. Perhaps the beginning of trust. 2 more days passed. The first caravan from Kochan arrived. A donkey, 2 sacks of rice, a sack of beans, a bundle of dried radishes. Yunboro walked beside the donkey, smiling. The villagers looked at the sacks as if they were a miracle. Rice, white rice, in a fishing village on the coast. They saw it twice a year, on holidays. Ji-yoon took the sacks, and the first thing he did was check the quality. He reached into the sack. The grains were dry, clean, no musty smell. Good rice. He measured out a portion, and that evening cooked rice porridge with fish and wild onions. Thick, filling. The village ate. 32 people, everyone. For the first time in a long time, they ate their fill. No one spoke. Only the sound of chopsticks against bowls and the crackling of the fire. The old fisherman, the very same one who had spat at the sight of Ju on the first day, sat by the fire and ate slowly. When his bowl was empty, he raised his head. He looked at Ju and nodded, once, briefly. That was enough. On the 15th day after June's Juna in the village, 2 on horseback. The horses were imperial, black coat, red ribbons in their manes, harness with bronze plates. 1 rider in leather armor, a hand on handles of the sword. The second in dark blue robe with a silver belt. Inspector, face round, smooth, antennae thin as drawn, eyes are small and alert. He dismounted and looked around. The village was frozen in silence. June stood by the shed at the pier and looked at them. My heart was pounding. He didn't know who these people of, but I knew that cavalry and armor do not come in fishing villages just. The village head, Pak, came to meet him. He bowed deeply. The inspector casually nodded. He introduced himself. The Chet of the 3rd rank from Provincial, of the Provincial Supervisory Office. He arrived to inspect the condition of the village following the publication decree Tishina, decree silence. June didn't know these words, but because that as his the Pekka, he realized that this bad. He walked closer and stood behind the Chet of the village headman. He listened. The inspector spoke in a bored voice. The emperor had issued a decree. Manhwa province was being punished for disobedience. Trade routes were closed. No grain, no salt, no livestock across the border. Any merchant caught with goods would be hanged. The blockade took effect at the full moon. That was 3 days ago. Ji-yoon stood and listened. The chain of logic he had just constructed was crumbling in his mind. A blockade. Trade routes closed. That meant no Sang-il wouldn't be able to transport fish to Kochang. That meant rice from Kochang wouldn't arrive. That meant the village would once again find itself trapped, alone, on the shore, with fish that no one could sell and without rice that they had no way to buy. He clenched his fists. Meanwhile, the inspector was walking through the village. He peered into the huts. He looked at the people, at the children, at the supplies. He was looking for signs of prosperity. If the village was well fed, it meant goods were flowing in somewhere. If goods were flowing in, it meant the blockade had holes. If the blockade had holes, it meant someone would have to hang from the bridge. June figured this out in 3 seconds. The mind of an operations director, risk assessment, instantaneous. He tapped the village head on the shoulder and whispered in his ear. Beck looked at him. His eyes widened, then narrowed. He nodded. The next hour was a performance. The village played along. Ji-yoon directed it. All the normal food was removed. Barrels of fish from the cellar were dragged to a pit beneath the chicken coop. They were covered with earth. Chickens were let loose on top. Sacks of salt were buried behind the huts. Rice was hidden in reed baskets at the bottom of the boats and covered with old nets. The salt evaporation trays were turned upside down and covered with seaweed. On the tables in the huts, they set out a watery porridge made from bran, murky and gray, the kind that doesn't fill you up but only makes you suffer. Next to it were clay mugs filled with herbal tea, bitter and pale. The children were given instructions. Mina stood next to Ji-yoon and translated his words for the other children because he spoke too quickly and too strangely. The children were supposed to look hungry, not to cry. A crying child arouses suspicion. The inspector might think the crying is fake. Hungry children don't cry. Hungry children are quiet. They sit and stare at a single point. They don't play, they don't run, they don't fight. They conserve their strength because they have none left. Mina listened to this, and her face turned to stone. She knew what it was like. She had been like that 3 weeks ago, for real. The inspector returned an hour later. He walked around the entire area. He peeked into every hut. He saw watery porridge on the tables. He saw the quiet children. He saw the empty eyes of the elderly. He saw Ji-yoon, thin, pale, standing by the wall of the hut. He asked who it was. The village head replied that he was a fisherman's son. He'd been sick, barely survived. The inspector looked at him indifferently. A boy on the verge of death in a destitute village. Nothing of interest. He walked past. Ji-yoon stood there, not moving. His heart was pounding so hard he was afraid the inspector would hear it, but his face was blank, hungry, dead, like Mina's face 3 weeks ago. The inspector finished his inspection. He mounted his horse. He took out a bamboo tablet and a brush. He wrote something. He told the village head that the village was on the brink and that the province would collapse in 20 days. He turned his horse around and rode off. The guard followed him. The dust settled. The village stood in silence. Then village head Beck sat down on the ground right where he was standing. His legs wouldn't hold him up. Ji-yoon walked over and sat down beside him. They were silent. Then Peck said that Ji-yoon had saved the village. Ji-yoon shook his head. He said he'd saved it today. Tomorrow the inspector might return, or someone else. And next time, the charade might not work. A solution was needed, a real one. Peck asked what kind. Ji-yoon said that the blockade was cutting off the trade routes. Roads, ridges, rivers, everything on the map. But the map isn't the territory. There are mountains, there are forest trails, there are dry riverbeds. There are paths that merchants don't use because they're inconvenient and dangerous. Imperial patrols aren't stationed on every goat trail. There aren't enough of them. Pak looked at him. Ji-yoon continued. He said he knew a trade network involving 3 villages was operating. Fish for rice, salt for beans. It works. But now it has to be done in secret, and not via No-Sangil along the road, but through the mountains, over the pass, at night, in small groups, so that if one caravan is intercepted, the others can get through. Peck said there was no road through the mountains. There were forests and rocks and wolves. Ji-yoon replied that a path could be cleared. They needed a guide, someone who knew the mountains. Peck thought for a moment. Then he said that a family of hunters lived in the mountain village of Sangol. They crossed the pass to the other side to hunt deer. They know the trails, but it's half a day's journey to Sangol. Ji-yoon nodded. Tomorrow he would go to Sangol. That night, he lay in the hut and stared into the darkness. Mina slept beside him. The sea roared beyond the wall. The blockade, the decree of silence. The province was cut off. The emperor wanted to starve them to death, and yet he, a fisherman's boy with a frail body, had formed a cooperative of 3 villages and, in a single day, outwitted an imperial official. The scale of it all. Don't think about the scale. Think about the next move. Tomorrow he'll head into the mountains. He'll find a guide. He'll chart a route through the pass. The first secret caravan. Salted cod in exchange for rice and iron. The emperor blocked the road. He didn't think to block all the roads. There aren't all of them. There are 6, and June will find all 6. He closed his eyes. His body ached. Tomorrow will be hard. But tomorrow, Mina will be full. That's what matters. The road to Sangol led upward. At first along the trail along the coastal forest, then along rocks along the stream, then over bare slope where the wind blew against face and our feet slipped on the wet grass. June walked and gasping for breath. His body was weak. With every strain was with pain in chest. The fever went away 3 days ago, but left after behind a void. The muscles didn't hold. My knees were trembling. Sweat streamed my eyes. Min-ae walked beside him. He didn't want to take her. She insisted, silently. She simply stood up by the door and watched. He waved his hand and walked away. She went after him. After 3 hours, they saw smoke. The village Sangol stood in a valley between 2 ridges, 8 houses, not made of clay like on coast, and wooden, log, with steep roofs so that the snow slides off. Around the houses, goats and chickens. At the house at log sat a girl and was sharpening the tip of arrowhead. Tall, thin, but not unhealthily, but muscular, tanned to bronze. Her hair pulled back into a knot at back of her head, her long and strong. She raised her head and looked at them, her dark and calm, like those a beast that is gauging the distance to jump. Next to her stood a bow, a long one, from dark wood. The bowstring made strings. June stopped. He said hello. He said that he was looking for the village elder of the village. The girl looked at him, then at Min-ae, then again to him. She stood up. Nothing did said. I walked to the building. They went behind her. The elder Sangol turned out to be a woman. She was 60, thin, straight, her face like the bark of a tree, low and steady. She listened to Ji-yoon. He spoke simply. He said that from the coast, what their village saltfish, what is the way through mountains to that side, what I'm willing to pay. The elder asked why across the mountains when there's a road. June replied that the road had been closed. Decree silence. The elder nodded. She heard. Mountain villages stood on from the imperial roads, and the blockade did not directly, but the news reached her. She asked what he was suggesting. June said that he needed a guide, someone who knows the pass, who will lead the caravan at night along the trails where there are the imperial patrols. Instead, Sangol will receive a share of each caravan, salt, fish, everything that you need. The elder remained silent. The girl with the bow stood by the wall and listened. The elder looked at her, then at Ji-yoon. She said that her granddaughter knows the pass better anyone in the village. He walks across it with 12 years old, in the winter and summer, in rain and in fog. But the question is not about the trails. The issue is why Sangol take the risk? If the Imperial Patrol catches the guide, then Sangol will be burned. June nodded. That's question. He replied that the blockade will not end in 20 days as the inspector. She will last months. It might a year. And when the coast dies out, the emperor will not stop. He will go deeper, into mountains, into valleys. It will take everything. It's the hungry empire devours its own outskirts. Sangul thinks that Cheon sighed. Sangul is wrong. She, in turn. The elder looked at him for a long time. Then I asked how old the years. Jun replied that 19. She chuckled. She said that he says like an old man who has lived 3 lives. Then she turned to a granddaughter and said one word, a name. Ha-in. The girl nodded. Not a word, not a question. She just nodded and left. An hour later, Ha-in was standing at the edge of the village with a bow on her back and a bag over her shoulder. Ready. Ji-eun looked at her. She looked at him. Min-ae stood between them, her gaze shifting from one to the other. They set off. Ha-yeon led the way. Ji-eun and Min-ae followed her. The trail wound its way up the slope, narrow, overgrown in places, littered with rocks in others. Ha-yeon walked as if on a level road, without looking back, without slowing down. Ji-eun stumbled and grabbed at branches. Min-ah fared better, light on her feet, petite, accustomed to rocks and sand. By evening they reached the pass. A gust of wind hit so hard that Ji-eun staggered. Below lay the other side, the valley, distant lights from the villages, a dark ribbon of the river. The road. That very same imperial road. From up here, it looked like a thin white thread, and far to the left on it stood a dot. A campfire. A patrol. Ha-yeon crouched on a rock and pointed. The trail led down from the pass, not toward the road but to the left, through the forest, to a bend in the river. There they could descend to the water and follow the riverbed to the village of Mushon, which lay beyond the borders of Manhwa province, beyond the blockade. Ji-eun looked and memorized. The distance, time, points where the caravan was vulnerable, points where they could wait it out, points where they could hide the cargo if they had to abandon it. His mind worked just as it used to, just like in the office. Route, logistics, risks. He asked Ha-in how long it would take to get a donkey with a load across the pass. She replied that it would take a night, from sunset to sunrise, provided the donkey isn't lame and the load isn't heavier than 100 kyun. He asked if it was possible to travel in the rain. She replied that it was possible, but slower. The rocks are slippery. He asked if it was possible in winter. She paused. Then she said it was possible, but dangerous. Snow covers the trail. You have to know every rock. She knows. He nodded. They went back down to Sangul. They spent the night at the elder's house. Min-ah fell asleep instantly. She curled up by the hearth and drifted off. Ji-eun sat there thinking. Ha-in sat nearby, mending the strap on her quiver, in silence. He spoke first. He asked why she had agreed. She didn't look up. She replied that her grandmother had told her to. He asked what if her grandmother hadn't said anything. She remained silent. Then she said that it was boring in the mountains in winter. He chuckled. She didn't smile, but her fingers moved a little faster on the strap. In the morning, Ji-eun returned to his village. Min-ah and Ha-in walked with him. Ha-in stayed behind, without explanation. She simply set her bag against the wall of Ji-eun's hut and sat down to sharpen her arrows. The villagers eyed her warily. A mountain hunter, silent, with a bow, a stranger. Ji-eun summoned village chief Baek and No Sang-gil. He laid out his plan before them. He had drawn it with charcoal on a piece of bark, the route through the pass, rest stops, travel time, and the volume of cargo. The first caravan would set out in 3 days, 50 pieces of salted cod, 10 sacks of salt. The cargo on 2 donkeys. Ha-in leads the way across the pass. No Sang-gil meets them on the other side and takes them to Muchon. The governor of Yeonhwa's second cousin lives in Muchon. There's no blockade there. There they can sell the fish and buy rice and iron and everything they need. Baek listened. His face was ashen. He understood the risk. If the caravan is caught, the village will be caught too. They'll hang everyone. Ji-eun said that's why the caravans would be small. 2 donkeys, 3 people, at night, along a trail that isn't on any maps. If one goes missing, the others won't know about it. Each caravan is autonomous. Each person knows only their own section of the route. Beck asked how he knew such things. Ji-yoon replied that he'd seen it in a dream. Beck didn't believe him, but he nodded. Because barrels don't lie, and because there was no other choice. 3 days later, at night, the first caravan set out. 2 donkeys, Hye-in in front, but Sang-il was with the donkeys. Ji-yoon stood at the edge of the village and watched as they disappeared into the darkness. Mina stood beside him. She held his hand. Her fingers were cold. He squeezed them and said everything would be all right. She didn't answer. She just stood there, holding his hand. The caravan was gone. Ji-yoon returned to the hut. He lay down. He didn't sleep. He counted. Time, distance. If Hye-in led the way as she promised, by dawn they'd be at the pass. By noon on the other side. By evening in Mushon. 2 days for selling and buying, 1 night for the return trip. In 5 days, they'd be back. Or maybe not. He lay there and waited. The 5 days dragged on. On the 6th day at dawn, Mina shook him by the shoulder. He jumped up, ran outside. 2 donkeys were standing at the edge of the village, 2 sacks on each. Hye-in was standing nearby, calm. Not a scratch on her. Her bow was slung behind her back, but Sang-il was sitting on the ground smiling. The sacks were heavy. Ji-yoon untied the first one. Rice, white, clean, dry. The second, salt, coarse, good quality. The third, iron, nails, staples, tool tips. The fourth, cloth, thick, winter cloth. He stood there looking at the sacks. Back in Seoul, he used to ship 60 metric tons of food a day. 4 sacks carried by 2 donkeys over a mountain pass at night. Ridiculous. But in this world, 4 sacks mean life. The villagers stood around watching. Village Chief Beck approached. He touched the sack of rice. Then he looked at Ji-yoon and smiled. For the first time in all these days, the first secret caravan had passed through. The route was working. The blockade had holes in it. Ji-yoon stood among the people who looked at him with something resembling hope, and he knew this was only the beginning. The next 2 weeks, Ji-yoon sent caravans across the pass every 4 days, small ones, 2 donkeys, 3 people, at night. Kane led one each. She knew the path just to her own hands, every stone, every turn, every place where you need to stop and listen the silence before then go on. But Sang-il was working on that side. He sold fish and salt in Machone. I bought rice and iron and fabric. He was returning. The village began to change. Not right away, not loudly, but noticeably. The children stopped sitting by the walls with empty eyes. They played. They ran along shore. They were fighting over seashells. The old men straightened their backs. The women sang while work. The fishermen went out to the sea and returned not with despair, but with excitement. That's why that every fish now had a meaning. Every fish now was about action. June didn't stop. His body grew stronger. The fever went away completely. He ate 3 times a day, porridge with fish in the morning, soup made seaweed and beans for lunch, rice with salted cod and wild onions in the evening. Minnie has filled out. Her cheeks stopped protrude. The blue disappeared from sight. She walked behind him through the village like a shadow, silent, serious. But sometimes he caught her face something resembling a smile. He instructed her to keep an eye on the pallets of salt, check the morm of water, top off in a timely manner. She did this with such concentration, as if from it on the fate of the for her, that, and it. At 20th 8th day after June's Jews in the village, the news but Sang-il brought from that side the pass. In Muchon, they say that the governor of Manhwa wants to see a person who feeds the coast. The governor. More precisely, the governor's wife. With Yeon-hee, a young widow of the late provincial of the province. She very which the emperor wants take for re-education, that very because of which decree of silence. June listened and paused to think. They was well known. Rumors reached to the capital of the province. Someone spilled the beans, someone in the chain of command. But Sangul, Yun Bora from Kochan, someone from the village, it doesn't matter who. What matters is that the information leaked. And if it reached the governor, it could reach the emperor's ears as well. He sat by the hearth and thought. Min-ah sat beside him and watched him. Ha-in stood by the door sharpening a knife. He made a decision. To ride. No, to walk. He didn't know how to ride. His body wouldn't allow it. It was a 3-day journey to the provincial capital, through the forest and over the hills, along trails that bypassed the imperial roads. Ha-in would lead the way. The next morning they set out. Jiun, Ha-in, Min-ah stayed behind in the village. He entrusted her to the village head, Beck. He said he'd be back in 7 days. Min-ah stood by the hut and watched. She didn't cry, she didn't ask to come along, she just stood there and watched. He turned away and walked off. It was harder than he'd thought. They walked through the forest for 3 days. Ha-in walked ahead, in silence. Sometimes she'd raise her hand and they'd stop. They'd listen. Once she pointed to the ground. Tracks. Horse tracks. Fresh. A patrol had passed through here that morning. They waited for an hour, then they went around them. They spent the night under the trees. Hain built a small fire, smokeless, from the dry branches of a certain kind of tree. Jiun remembered which one. On the second day, he asked her why she lived alone in the mountains. She didn't answer right away. She said she'd left her family, that in the village where she was from, girls were married off at 14, that her father had sold her older sister to a merchant for 3 goats, that when it was her turn, she took a bow and went into the mountains. She was 13. A grandmother in Sangul took her in. She taught her how to hunt for real. She'd been living in the mountains for 9 years and had never once regretted it. Ji-un listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he said that in his village, she could be whoever she wanted to be. She looked at him for a long time. Then she turned away. She didn't say anything, but at the next rest stop, she sat closer to him. On the 3rd day, they reached the city, the provincial capital of Yonhua. Ji-un had expected to see something small. He was wrong. The city stood in a wide valley on the banks of a river. Walls of gray stone, gates with carved pillars, tile-roofed houses, a market, streets, people, guards at the gates. But the city was quiet, too quiet for its size. The market was half empty, the stalls were bare, the faces were gray. A blockade. The city could feel it, not like the coast. The coast fed off the sea. The city depended on trade routes, and the routes were cut off. Ha-in led him through a side gate. She showed the sign given to her by Elder Sangul. The guards let them through. The governor's palace stood in the center of the city. Not huge, not luxurious. A sturdy stone building with 2 stories and a garden behind the wall. A man met them at the palace gates, an elderly man, in a dark robe with an insignia, an advisor. He looked Jiun up and down. His face hadn't changed, but there was disappointment in his eyes. He had been expecting someone else, not a boy in fisherman's clothes with dirty feet. They were led inside. Corridors, wooden floors, the scent of incense, the scent of old wood, the scent of power. Jiun walked and looked around. He counted the doors, he counted the guards, he measured the distances, a habit. They were led into a room, small, low ceiling, a screen with cranes, cushions on the floor. Someone was sitting behind the screen, a shadow, a woman's figure, a voice, steady, cold, calm. Governor So Yeon-hee asked his name. He introduced himself, Han Ji-un. She asked where he was from. He replied that he was from a fishing village on the coast. She asked if it was true that he was feeding 3 villages by circumventing the blockade. He replied that it was. She asked how. He explained, briefly, clearly, salting, standardization, barter, a caravan route through the mountain pass. Silence. Then the screen slid aside. She stepped out. So Yun-hee, 26 years old, tall, upright. Her face was beautiful and impassive, like a mask. Dark eyes, dark hair pulled back into a part. Her hands were folded in front of her, a dark blue hanbok with silver embroidery. And Ji-yoon saw what he was looking for. Her belly. Small but noticeable if you knew where to look. She was pregnant, 4 months, maybe 5. She was hiding it. Her robe was loose. Her hands covered her belly. But her gait. He recognized that gait. Her center of gravity was shifted slightly backward. Her steps were cautious. That's how women walk when they're carrying a child and are afraid of losing it. She looked down at him from above. He was kneeling, as was proper before the governor. She said she'd expected to see someone older. He replied that older didn't mean wiser. She didn't smile, but something in her eyes flickered. She sat down across from him, slowly, carefully, and began to speak. For the first time during this conversation, she spoke from the heart. She said the province was holding out, but not for long. The city had 2 months' worth of supplies. The villages had less. The advisors said they should surrender, to hand it over to the emperor, to save the province. She fell silent. Ji-yoon looked at her hands. She was holding them on her lap, and her fingers were trembling ever so slightly. He said they didn't need to surrender. He said he could build a network that would feed not just 3 villages, but the entire province. He needed resources, people, time, and her trust. She looked at him for a long time. Then she asked why she should trust a fisherman's boy. He replied that she didn't have to, but that she had no choice, because the advisors who say to surrender are thinking only of themselves, and he's thinking about making sure people have food to eat. She closed her eyes, opened them, nodded once. With Yun-hee gave him 3 items, seal on the plate, the right to speak from her behalf, and the room in the palace on 3 days. The exhibition opened the doors. The right gave a voice, the room gave time. He used all 3. The first day he spent in the archives, a small, dusty room on the first floor of the palace. Scrolls, hundreds scrolls, maps of the province, lists of villages, tax records, census. Census, crop by year. He read. Language of this world he mastered in 3 weeks. Not perfect, but enough to analyze numbers. The numbers were bad. Manhwa, 47 villages, 12,000 people. The coast lives on fish. The valley thrives rice and beans. The mountains live hunting and gathering. Until the blockade, all they sold through imperial roads. They bought salt, iron, fabric, spices, medicines. They used to sell fish, rice, and timber. Now trade has come to a standstill. Every village is holed up on its own, slowly running down its supplies. He spread a map out on the floor, a large one on cloth drawn in ink. Beautiful, but useless. The scale was off, the distances were approximate. Only the imperial roads were shown. Mountain trails and river routes weren't marked. He took some charcoal and began drawing over it. His own map, a real one. Villages, distances he'd traveled on foot or learned from Hain and No Sang-gil. Trails, mountain passes, ford crossings, travel times. He drew and saw a system, not chaos, a system. The province was like a body. Roads were arteries. Villages were organs. Food was blood. The emperor had severed the main arteries, but the small capillaries remained. Mountain trails, forest clearings, dry riverbeds, fishing coves. If the capillaries were connected, the blood could be rerouted. Slower, more difficult, but the blood would flow. He worked until nightfall. On the morning of the second day, he requested a meeting with the governor's advisors. There were 4 of them. Senior advisor Kwan Ho Shik, 60 years old, a gray beard, a stern gaze, a former military officer. Chief of the Guard, Che Mun-so, 55, broad as a wardrobe, a scar across his entire forehead, a veteran of 3 border wars. Head of the Merchants Guild, John Il-hwan, 50, fat, fingers adorned with rings, intelligent yet malicious eyes. Treasurer Park Sung-ju, 45, quiet, unassuming. He was taking notes on everything. They sat in the council chamber and looked at Ji-un. 4 men, each twice his age, each of whom had weathered wars, intrigues, and famine. And standing before them was a fisherman's boy holding a coal map in his hands. Ji-un saw their faces: contempt, irritation, boredom. Only the chief of the guard, Cho Mun-so, looked at him with something else, with curiosity, like a man who had seen enough not to judge by appearances. Ji-un unfolded the map. He laid it on the floor in front of them. He began to speak. He spoke as if at a meeting before a board of directors, calmly, with figures, without emotion. He said that the province could feed itself, without imperial roads, without foreign trade, if logistics were restructured. The coast produces fish and salt. The valley produces rice and vegetables. The mountains provide game and timber. The problem isn't a shortage. The problem is distribution. Each village keeps to itself and doesn't know what its neighbors have. No communication, no routes, no standards. He pointed to the map. 6 routes, through mountain passes, along riverbeds, along forest trails. Each route connects 3 or 4 villages. Each village produces what it's good at. Trade happens via caravans, small ones, nighttime ones, along trails that don't appear on imperial maps. The head of the Merchants Guild, John Il-hwan, cut him off. His voice was oily, his words were heavy. He said the boy didn't understand how trade worked, that caravans weren't just donkeys and sacks. They were permits, duties, guarantees. The guild had spent centuries building this system, and the boy couldn't just come along and replace it with a drawing on a rag. Ji-un listened. He looked at Il-hwan, and he replied. He said that the guild had spent centuries building a system that worked in peacetime. Now there was a war. In wartime, different rules apply. The guild cannot guarantee supplies because it relies on imperial roads, and those roads are closed. His drawing on a rag is the only route that works right now. 3 villages on the coast are already eating thanks to that drawing. The guild can either join in or explain to the starving people why duties are more important than rice. Silence. Il-hwan flushed. Advisor Kwan Ho Shik raised his hand. Quiet. He turned to Ji-un and asked what he needed. Ji-un replied. He needed people, cart drivers, porters, guides. He needed storage facilities, caves in the mountains, cellars in the villages, any hidden places where food could be stored. He needed information. What each village produced, how many people lived there, what supplies they had, which trails the locals knew. And he needed protection. Patrols on the mountain trails, guards at the approaches. Because the emperor would send more than just inspectors. He would send men with swords. Chief Guard Munso nodded at those last words. He knew. He had been expecting this. So Young-hee sat behind a screen and listened. Ji-un knew she was there. He could hear her quiet breathing. After the council meeting, she came out. She looked at the map on the floor, then at Ji-un. She said he would get everything he asked for. People, warehouses, information, protection. But there was a condition. He was responsible for the outcome. If the province was starving in a month, he would leave. He agreed, because in a month the province would not be starving. He knew that, just as he knew that fish salted properly wouldn't spoil, just as he knew that the route through the pass worked, just as he knew that people who are fed don't betray you. He returned to his room, sat down, unfolded the map, and began to plan. 47 villages, 12,000 mouths to feed, 6 routes, 4 warehouses, 2 communication systems, 1 province. 100 days before the emperor loses his patience. He took a piece of charcoal and began to write. A list, long, detailed. Every item was an action. Every action was a person. Every person was a mouth to feed. A circle, closed, beautiful, effective. Mina was waiting for him in the village. Hain stood behind the door. He could hear her sharpening a knife. He wrote. Until dawn. He returned to village and began work. The first thing he did was send But Sangilya to all villages along the coast, 7 villages. Not Sangil brought a simple message. The fisherman's boy from a coastal village says on behalf of the governor's wife, who wants to eat in winter, let's send the village head to meet in 5 days. The governor of the meeting, the village of Juna. In 5 days, 4 people, out of 7. 3 did showed up, 2 didn't believed it. 1 was afraid. 4 who came were village elders, elderly, cautious, on guard. They settled in a circle on the shore and watched at Jiun. He stood in front of them, with behind the sea. In my hands, a clay with the seal of the governor's wife. He showed the seal. They looked at it. They exchanged glances. The seal is genuine. That changed matter. He spoke up. Not long, not beautifully, to the point. He said that he knows their problems because that this is his problems. The fish is going bad. Salt isn't enough. To sell is with. Winter will come, and half of the villages will survive to spring. But if we work together, they will survive. That's all. He explained the system. Every village does something it does best of all. 1 catches fish. The others salt them. A 3rd dries seaweed. The 4th makes ropes and baskets for carrying. The 5th carries. No one does by themselves. Everyone does one, but well. Standards. 1 measure of salt to 1 measure of fish. The same slicing, uniform arrangement, same duration. To the product from any village was the same, so that the buyer know what they'll receive. One of the elders asked who will buy. The roads are closed. Jiun replied that the roads are closed to imperial merchants. For mountain, the roads are open, and for donkeys that travel along the goat trails as well. The village elders exchanged glances. They understood. Smuggling, black market trade, dangerous. But the choice was simple, risk or starvation. They chose risk, all 4 of them. Handshakes, a deal, verbal. In this world, paper was worthless. A promise was everything. June gave his word that not a single village would go hungry. They gave their word that they would work to his standards. For the next 2 weeks, he slept no more than 4 hours a night. He traveled from village to village, on foot, with Ha-in, sometimes with Min-A when the journey was short. He would arrive in a village, and the first thing he did was go to the kitchen. He watched how they salted fish, how they dried seaweed, how they stored grain, and he corrected them, patiently, calmly, just like trainees in a warehouse. This is the right measure. This is the right temperature. This is how many days. Check it this way. If it floats, the brine is strong. If it sinks, it's weak. Simple, clear, repeatable. In the village of Chunghae, he found a woman who was doing something surprising. She was pickling cabbage, roughly, incorrectly, too little salt and too short a time, but the principle itself, she knew that vegetables could be fermented. June sat down next to her and spent 3 hours with her. He showed her the correct proportions: salt, garlic, ginger, pepper if available, radish, thyme, temperature. He showed her how to make kimchi without using that word, just fermented cabbage with spices. A week later, she brought him a pot. He lifted the lid, and the smell hit him in the face. Sour, spicy, garlicky, familiar. He tasted it. Not perfect, a bit rough around the edges, but recognizable. Delicious. Truly delicious. He looked at the woman. Her name was Oh Gun-hui, 50 years old, stout. Her hands were red from work. Her eyes were expectant. He told her it was the best thing he'd ever eaten in this world. She laughed, toothlessly, loudly. He told her she would teach others, that every village that grew cabbage would do so, using her recipe, to his standards. She would be in charge. Ogan Hui stopped laughing. She looked at him seriously. Then she nodded. In the village of Heijin, he found something else. An old man who made soybean paste, just as rough, just as wrong. He boiled the beans too long, he used too little salt, he fermented it for too short a time. But he knew the principle. Jiun sat down with him and spent 2 days with him. He showed him how to do it right, how long to boil it, how much salt to use, how to shape the blocks, how to dry them, and how to ferment them in clay pots at the right temperature. The old man listened, silently. Then he did everything as instructed. A month later, the first batch of proper soybean paste was ready. Jiun tasted it. He closed his eyes. Thick, salty, with a deep, earthy flavor. Not like the doenjang from the store in Seoul. Better, because the beans were fresh, because the water was clean, because the pots were made of local clay that breathes differently than factory-made ceramics. He opened his eyes. The old man was looking at him. Jiun said it was worth silver, not copper coins, silver. The old man didn't understand. He'd been eating this paste himself his whole life and feeding it to his pig. Jiun explained. In the capital, the aristocrats eat pasta that's worse than this, because their pasta is made in large vats in the imperial kitchens, quickly, in large quantities, poorly. But this is made by hand in a small pot of fine clay. It's a different product. It's not just pasta. It's pasta from Manhwa. The old man stared, unable to believe it. But Jiun had already done the math. 20 pots of pasta, ceramics with a wax seal, a route through the mountain pass, to Mucheon. From there, via merchants to the capital, to the aristocrats' tables. The price is 20 times higher than the cost of production, because the aristocrats aren't paying for the product. They're paying for the story, for rarity, for a flavor no one else has. He knew that. 12 years in restaurant supply. The most expensive dish in Seoul isn't the most complicated one. It's the rarest one, with a story, with a name, with a face. By the end of the second month after Jiun's awakening, the network was up and running. 5 villages on the coast, fish and salt, 3 villages in the valley, rice, vegetables, and kimchi, 2 villages in the mountains, game, the forest, and guides, Kochang, Hamni, Sangol. 2 caravan routes through the mountain passes, 1 river route along the dry riverbed, 4 villages salted fish according to standard practice, 2 made kimchi, 1 made paste. The first warehouse was in a cave halfway to the pass. Hain found it, dry, cool. The entrance was hidden by bushes. Inside, they could store 100 sacks. They reinforced the walls with extra clay for insulation. They set up shelves made of poles. The first shipment went to Mucheon via the pass. Not just fish. Salted cod in clay pots with lids. Kimchi in ceramic jars tied with rope. 20 pots of soybean paste, each pot marked with charcoal. Manhwa, 2 words that would become a brand in a month. But Sang-gil returned after a week, with silver, real silver. The merchants in Mucheon were fighting over the pots of paste. They bought the kimchi without haggling. They took the fish in bulk. But Sang-il said that people in Mucheon were asking where it came from and if there was more. Ji-un stood there, holding the silver in the palm of his hand. 5 coins. In Seoul, that would have been pocket change. Here, it was a start. He gave 2 coins to Beck, 1 to Sang-gil, 1 to the communal fund. He kept 1, not for himself, for Min-ah, for a rainy day. She didn't know. He didn't tell her. He simply hid the coin behind a rock in the wall of the hut, his first stash. On 3rd month, problems. The first problem was internal. The head of the guild, Jung Il-hwan, did not forgive the humiliation at the council. He didn't attack openly. He acted like a merchant. quiet, through people, through words, through doubts. Rumors began spread through the villages like smoke. A young boy serves in the interests. A fisherman's boy secretly sells fish to the enemies of the province. A young boy is possessed by a spirit who tells through his mouth. Rumors were nonsense, but silly rumors work better than smart ones because that they easier to retell. June found out from But Sangal. He had heard in Hamni, then from one of the new villages. He said that his people were getting nervous. They're asking questions. Who is Guy? Where does know that he? Why he this? June sat by hearth and was thinking. Min A was asleep. Hain was standing behind the door. He thought about what that in Seoul with such problems were lawyers and the PR department. Here are lawyers here. Here are PR department here. Here is one. And there's barrels that don't lie. He decided not to fight against the rumors. I won't refute them. Don't make excuses. He decided to it so that the rumors became unimportant. He sent 5 caravans in 1 week, in all routes. Each caravan carried fish and kimchi and pasta. Each caravan returned with rice and salt and cloth. Villages received goods. People ate. Who feeds this is right. This simple rule worked better to any rebuttal. After 10 days, the rumors subsided. They disappeared. But have died down. People ate, and they felt not time gossip. The second problem was more serious. On the 5th day of the month, Hain came running back from the pass. She never ran. She always walked at a steady, measured pace. But now she was running. Jiyun stepped out of the hut and saw her face, pale, tense. She said 2 words, the village of Kalmak. He didn't know that name. She explained. Kalmak, a small village on the other side of the ridge, 20 houses. They weren't part of Jiyun's network. They were on their own. They were. Now they're gone. An imperial patrol found a sack of salted fish in the village. The fish came from the coast. Someone from Kalmak had bought it from a merchant who had bought it from a man who had bought it from No Sangil. A chain, a long one, uncontrollable. The patrol burned the village, all of it, houses, barns, sheds. They didn't harm the people, but they burned the houses. 80 people left homeless, without food, without anything, as a lesson. Jiyun stood there and listened. Something inside him tightened, cold, heavy. He knew this would happen, not specifically, but in general. A blockade is war, and in war there are casualties. He just thought the casualties would come later, that he'd have time to prepare. He didn't. He sat down on a rock by the hut, closed his eyes, breathed. In, out, in, out. Then he stood up, told Hain that they were going to Kalmak. She nodded. They walked for half a day, over the pass, through the forest. By evening they saw smoke, not from campfires, from the ruins. The village of Kalmak was black. Charred beams jutted out of the ground like bones. The smell of burnt wood and burnt fabric and something else. Burnt life. People sat all around, on the ground, on rocks, on whatever was left. Women, children, old people, men with empty hands and empty eyes. They looked at June, not with hope, not with anger, with emptiness. They weren't expecting anything anymore. June stood and watched. Then he turned to Hyun and said they had to go back, quickly. She looked at him. She didn't understand. He explained. These people, 80 people, they needed food and shelter, now, not tomorrow. Now. He could provide it, but they had to get to the warehouse in the cave, and they had to send people to the nearest villages, gather food, gather cloth for shelters, gather everything they could find. They returned across the pass in 4 hours. Hain led the way so quickly that Jiyun fell twice on the rocks. His knees were scraped raw. He didn't notice. In the village, he roused Baek. He roused the fishermen. He sent messengers to Chonghae and Haejin. By morning, a caravan was waiting at the pass. Not a trade caravan, a relief convoy. 5 donkeys, sacks of rice, barrels of fish, pots of kimchi, bundles of cloth, ropes, axes. A day later, all of this was in Kalmok. Jiun stood amid the charred remains of the village and handed out food, personally, to everyone. He looked them in the eyes. He gave each person a bowl of hot fish and rice soup with ginger. The soup smelled like life. Amid the charred wood and ashes, people ate, in silence. One old woman finished her soup and looked up at him. She asked who he was. He replied that he was from a coastal village. She asked why he had come. He replied that it was because they were hungry. She began to cry, quietly, silently. Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks and dripped into her empty bowl. He turned away, swallowed hard, went back to work. The people from Kalmoka were given a place to stay. Some went to neighboring villages, some went to Sangol, some stayed put and began rebuilding. Jiun gave them enough food to last a month from the network's reserves. The cave's stockpile had been reduced by half. He knew this would disrupt the plan, that he'd have to make up for it. More caravans, more fish, more pasta. But that was for later. Right now, the main thing was that 80 people had eaten a hot meal. When he returned to his village, he lay down on his mattress and just lay there. He didn't sleep. He thought. Kalmok had been burned because of a sack of fish, just one sack, which had slipped through an uncontrolled supply chain. His supply chain, his mistake. He hadn't tracked where the goods went after No Sangil. He'd lost control, and the people paid the price. He swore to himself that no other village would ever, never again. He sat down and began to think about control, about how to track every sack, every pot, every piece of fish, from the village to the end buyer. And he came up with an idea. Marks. Each village would mark its goods with a unique symbol, charring coal on clay. A symbol. Simple, recognizable. Whoever sells it on must remember who they sold it to. A chain of accountability. If the goods turn up somewhere they shouldn't, it will be possible to find the link where the leak occurred, and seal it off. He began drawing symbols for each village. Simple ones. A fish for the coast, an ear of grain for the valley, a mountain for Sangol. He drew and thought of Kalmok, about the old woman with the empty bowl, about the smell of burnt wood, and about the fact that somewhere in the capital sat the emperor who had ordered this to be done, who believed that famine was the natural order of things, who didn't know the name of a single person from Kalmok. Jiun knew. Now he knew. He had memorized every face. Min-ah woke up and walked over to him. She looked at the drawings. He showed her the sign of the fish. He said that was their village. She held out a finger and traced around the drawing. Then she looked at him. And for the first time in all these weeks, she spoke a long sentence. She said she wanted him to teach her to count, the way he counts, with charts and measuring sticks and numbers. He looked at her, 10 years old, thin, serious, her fingers covered in coal dust. He nodded. "We'll start tomorrow." She smiled, a small, fleeting smile that vanished before he could catch it, but it was there, her first real smile. In the 3rd month in village, Junna, a young woman, alone, on foot, in dusty traveling robe, with a bag on his back containing which stuck out handles, knives. She stopped by the awning at the pier and looked around. She saw barrels. She saw pallets filled with salt. I saw women who were salting fish with smooth movements according to the standard. She came closer. I leaned over the barrel. She sniffed. She took out a knife. She cut off a piece of fish. I tasted it. She closed my eyes. I chewed for a long time. Then I opened her eyes and asked the nearest woman, "Who is in charge?" The woman showed her Ji-woon. He was sitting on an overturned boat and was talking with But Sangol about the next caravan. The girl approached. She stood in front of him, broad-shouldered, strong, her hands with calluses from knife, face round and open, eyes are intense. She said that her name is Yoon Das, 24 years old, chef, former court chef, House Kim in the capital. He asked, why ex-boyfriend? She replied that she had been fired. She suggested to change the recipe, soup made seafood, add ginger and sesame oil. Chapter after said that the recipe 300 years and that the cook has not is the right to change that the masters. She replied that the craftsmen 300 years ago didn't tried ginger with sesame seeds. They was, to that same day. June listened, and inside him something warm stirred, familiar. He knew this guy. A man who loves his work so that he can keep quiet when sees how they is badly. There are in his company in Seoul, there were 3 people. Each cost 10. He asked why she had here. She replied that she had rumors. In the capital, there's about products from Manhwa, fish sauce, kimchi, pasta. They say that it's magic. They say that someone in Yanghui knows the secrets that have been lost for centuries ago. She wanted to find this man. She walked for 2 weeks, after 3 provinces. I went around the patrols. I slept under the trees. She ate on eye she found. That's that she needed to see the kitchen in where they make such things. June looked at her, then stood up. I said, let's go. He led her to the hut where Oganki was making kimchi. Dasom walked in. She stopped. She looked at pots, at cabbage, at spices arranged in bowls. On hands, Ogan, who worked confidently and accurately. Dasom sat down beside me. She watched, silently. Then I reached out my hand and asked to try it. Ogan gave her a piece from a pot that had been fermenting for 2 weeks. Dasom put it in her mouth. She chewed. Her eyes closed. When she opened them, they were filled with tears. She said that for 20 years she had cooked in kitchens where no one listened to her. For 20 years she had fed people who couldn't tell the difference in taste and ate only because they were supposed to. And here, in a clay hut by the sea, an old woman was making with her own hands the best thing Dasom had ever seen in her entire life. Jiun stood in the doorway and watched. He made a decision. He told Dasom that she didn't need to look for a kitchen. She would build a kitchen, her own, the main one. He appointed her head of everyone in the network who cooks and produces food. Fish, kimchi, pasta, sauces, everything. She'll set the menu, she'll approve the recipes, she'll check the quality. He'll handle logistics, she'll handle the food. Dasom stood there and looked at him. Then she asked if it was true. He said it was true. She untied the bag and took out her knives. 5 of them, different sizes. Each one was sharpened to razor sharpness. She placed them on the table and said she'd start right away. By evening, she was already bossing around 3 women in the kitchen and yelling at the fishermen who'd brought in cod with dirty gills, loudly, cheerfully, like someone who had finally found her place. Mina sat in the corner and watched her with delight. Dasom noticed. She beckoned her over. She handed her a knife, a small one. She showed her how to peel ginger. Mina peeled it slowly and carefully. Her tongue stuck out from the effort. Dasom watched her and smiled, a wide, warm smile, like the mother Mina never had. That same evening, a second event took place. A messenger from the provincial capital, a young man on a foaming horse. He brought a message from the governor's wife. So Young-hee asked Ji-un to come, urgently. There was a hostage in the palace, a princess. Ji-un didn't know about her. No one had mentioned her. She had been forgotten. The youngest princess, Lee Ji-yun, the emperor's 7th daughter, 20 years old, sent to Yanhua before the Edict of Silence as a hostage, and left there. The emperor had either forgotten about her or decided she wasn't worth his attention. The messenger said the princess was ill. She wasn't eating. She was growing weaker. So Young-hee didn't know what to do with her. Ji-un got ready in an hour. He took Ha-in. He took a bag of food. He walked for 3 days. When he reached the palace, he was led to a small pavilion in a far corner of the garden. Quiet, abandoned, dust on the railing, dry leaves on the steps. It was dark inside. It smelled of medicinal herbs and illness. A girl was lying on a mattress, thin, pale to the point of transparency. Her hair was scattered across the pillow. Her hands were as thin as twigs. She wasn't asleep. She was staring at the ceiling. Her eyes were huge and dark. Next to her stood a bowl of untouched food, rice porridge, plain. Ji-eun crouched down. He looked at the bowl. He touched the porridge. It was cold, thick, heavy. He sniffed it. Then he looked at Ji-eun. He asked what was hurting her. She didn't turn around. She answered quietly. Her stomach. Everything she eats comes right back up, ever since she was a child. The doctors said she had a weak stomach. They gave her medicine, bitter medicine. It didn't help. Ji-eun listened. A picture was forming in his mind. A weak stomach, can't digest heavy food, can't tolerate fatty foods, most likely an intolerance to certain proteins, or chronic inflammation. In his world, she would have been sent to a gastroenterologist. There were no gastroenterologists here, but there was knowledge. He stood up, went out, found the palace kitchen, took it over. The cooks looked at him in horror. A fisherman's boy in dirty clothes was giving orders in the palace kitchen. He didn't notice them. He was making broth, bone broth, from chicken bones. It took a long time, 6 hours. He skimmed off the foam. He strained it 3 times. He added ginger, just a little, a pinch of turmeric he'd found in the pantry. He boiled the rice until it was a runny porridge, not thick, almost transparent. He mixed it with the broth. The result was something between soup and porridge, light, warm, gentle on the stomach. He carried the bowl to the pavilion, sat down next to Ji-eun, placed the bowl in front of her. She looked at it, then at him. She asked what it was. He replied that it was porridge, special, just for her. She said she couldn't eat it, that everything just comes right back up. He said this one wouldn't. She looked into his eyes. Something in his voice made her believe him. Maybe it was his calmness. Maybe it was his confidence. She picked up a spoon. She took a taste. A small spoonful. She waited. Another one. She waited. A third. He sat beside her, counting. Seconds. If it didn't come back up in 10 minutes, it meant her stomach had accepted it. It didn't come back up in 10 minutes. In 20 minutes, the bowl was empty. Ji-eun was lying on the mattress, her eyes closed. Her hands were on her stomach, not because of pain, because of surprise. She whispered that nothing hurt. He nodded. He said there would be more tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow. Every day, small portions, often, just for her. She opened her eyes. There was something in them that he'd seen before. In Minna, in the old woman from Kalmoka, in Ogan. Amazement, that someone had noticed, that someone had cared, that someone had remembered what she needed. He stood up and left. So Yan-hee was standing by the door. She had heard everything. She looked at him, silently. Then she quietly said thank you. He replied that it was nothing, that the princess had simply eaten the wrong thing, that her stomach wasn't weak, it was just different, and it needed different food. So Yan-hee looked at him, and her mask-like face twitched, just a tiny bit, at the corners of her eyes. The 4th month began with 2 events at the same time. The first was a good one. The first game of Manhwa products secretly made its way onto the table in the capital of the empire. Kim's Kim. A dinner. 40 guests, 3 great houses, a merchant broker whose butt Sangol found in Muchon dragged 10 pots through 4 hands. Kimchi, pasta, salted in a ceramic with wax stamp, fish sauce aged for 3 months aged. Chef at home Kim doesn't know that it was. They was that the food from old stocks, a rarity. He served them to the table. Her reaction was instantaneous. June learned the details within 2 weeks. After monks, through beggars, through a network of people who spread rumors from the capital to a bowl of savin and a place by the fire. Information is also logistics. At dinner at Kim's youngest daughter of the Phil, for the first time in long years, ate 3 dishes in a row. The girl who has childhood had stomach problems and ate little by little. 3 dishes, up to the bottom. Her mother was crying openly at the table. She didn't hesitating. Chapter of the Kim put down his chopsticks. Quietly, he quieted the servant. He asked where the food came from. The servant whispered into his ear. 2 days the head house didn't nod from office. On 3rd day he secretly sent a messenger, not to the emperor, to a merchant middleman. 1 word: more. Ji-yoon was standing on the shore when he found out about this. The wind carried the scent of salt. The sea was gray. He closed his eyes, and a map unfolded in his mind. The capital, the 12 great houses. Each house is a family. Every family eats 3 times a day. Every meal is an opportunity. If one house has tried it and wants more, that means in a month everyone will want it. Because aristocrats compete in everything, including food. He opened his eyes and began to calculate production capacity, volumes, routes, time. He needed more people, more kitchens, more pots, and dasam. He needed dasam more than ever. He returned to the village and found dasam in the kitchen. She was experimenting with fish sauce, adding fermented beans, tasting it, spitting it out, adding more. He told her about the capital, about the house of Kim, about his youngest daughter. Dasam listened. Her expression changed. She knew the cuisine of the house of Kim. She had worked there. She knew their chef was talentless, that he'd been cooking the same recipes for 20 years, that his food was tasteless and heavy, and that now this house had tasted real food. She smiled, broadly, predatorily. She said she would create something for the capital that would make the imperial kitchen seem like a pig trough. She didn't say it to boast. She said it like a master who knows her worth. Ji-yoon nodded. He believed her. The second event was a bad one. On the 10th day of the 4th month, the night cranes arrived in Manhwa, the Imperial Secret Service. Ji-yoon learned of this from Seo Yeon-hee. A messenger had rushed in during the night. The message was brief. Strangers had entered the province, 5 of them, maybe more. They weren't in uniform, they weren't carrying swords. They looked like merchants, like monks, like traveling musicians. But the guards at the western border recognized one of them, a former soldier who now serves the night cranes. The hunt began. The emperor realized that Yanhua wasn't starving. He realized that supplies were coming from somewhere. He realized that someone had organized a network, and he sent people to find that someone. Ji-yoon sat in the hut, lost in thought. Min-ah was asleep. Ha-in stood by the door, bow in hand. The sum was snoring in the neighboring hut. The sea roared beyond the wall. The night cranes. Professionals. Not some village inspector who can be fooled by a charade. These guys will dig deep. They'll interrogate. They'll bribe. They'll threaten. They'll find the chain, sooner or later. All they need is one weak link, one frightened peasant, one greedy merchant, one talkative village headman. He had to restructure the network, make it invisible. He started with the routes. Each caravan now knew only its own section of the route. A guide led from point A to point B. There, another guide took over the goods and led them to point C. No one knew the full route except Ji-yoon and Hyun. Then there was communication. He devised a code, a simple one. The routes were recorded as wedding wishes, on long scrolls of red paper. The sending village was the groom's name, the receiving village was the bride's name. The quantity of goods was the number of guests. The date of shipment was the wedding date. If a patrol found a scroll, they would see a wedding invitation. Harmless. Then the warehouses. He divided each warehouse into 3 parts, in different locations. If one is found, the other 2 will remain. Then there were the people. Everyone in the network knew only those with whom they worked directly. The fisherman knew the salt curer knew the coachman knew the guide. No one knew everyone. No one knew Jiun, except for the elders, and Hain, and Dasum, and No Sang-il. 4 people, 4 points of vulnerability. He couldn't get rid of them. Without them, the network wouldn't function. He could only trust them. The 3rd week of the 4th month, Jung So-hee, the daughter of the head of the Merchants Guild, 19 years old. She came to see Jiun in the village with a letter from her father. Il-hwan was offering peace, cooperation. The guild was ready to help with trade if Jiun shared his roots. The letter was polite, the words were proper, the intentions were transparent. Il-hwan wanted control. Jiun read the letter. He looked at So-hee. She stood before him and looked back at him, without fear, without obsequiousness, with cold curiosity. He could see she was smart. He could see she wasn't here just as a messenger. She was here as his father's eyes and ears. A spy. He knew it. She knew he knew. An interesting situation. He said he would accept the guild's help, but he wouldn't reveal the roots. In exchange, he offered something else. So-hee would stay with him as an analyst. She would gather information on demand, what buyers wanted, how much they were willing to pay, which products were in style and which weren't. She would be his eyes on the market. She looked at him for a long time. Then she asked why he needed this. He replied that without data, he was working blindly, and she was a merchant's daughter. Trading was in her blood. She knew the market better than he did. That was true, and it was a compliment. And it was a weapon, because no one in her life had ever told her that her mind was a tool, not a toy. Her father used to tell her she was almost a son, but not quite, that her observations were amusing but not serious. But here, a fisherman's boy was telling her that without her charts, he was blind. She nodded. She sat down. She picked up a clay tablet and a stylus, and she began to write. 2 weeks later, she stopped passing on anything of value to her father. She passed on numbers, correct ones, but useless ones. And she did the real work for Jiun. The 6th month. The network had expanded to 20 villages, 4 warehouses, 7 routes. In the capital at Jiu, there were a steady stream customers among the 3 great houses. Each of them thought that they were exclusively. Everyone paid 3 times the price. Silver flowed into Treasury Governor's wife. From Yan He used it to strengthen the walls and the procurement weapons. It was preparing for war. Ji-yun was preparing for that, to war would not be necessary. Princess Ji-yun grew stronger. Every morning, Ji-yun, whenever wood in the capital of the province, I brought her breakfast. Porridge on bone broth with ginger. Sometimes with turmeric, sometimes with honey from mountain apiary. A small bowl, warm, designed for her stomach. She ate and every time was watching at him as if he were a miracle. He wasn't as miracles. He simply remembered that she needed. One day she asked why he. He replied that she her regimen and she cannot be skipped. She laughed, quietly for the first time. Then she covered her mouth with her hand, as if laughter were something forbidden. Se-young-hee was changing too, slowly, imperceptibly to those who weren't watching. But Ji-eun was watching. He saw how the mask on her face was growing thinner, how a weary woman was peering through the cold ruler. Her belly was growing, 6 months, 7. She was hiding it, but she wasn't hiding it from Ji-eun. One night, he brought her dinner to her study. She was working on the scrolls. Her face was ashen with fatigue. He set a bowl in front of her, seaweed soup with tofu and sesame oil. Daso had created the recipe specifically for pregnant women, light, nutritious, rich in iron and calcium. So-yun looked at the bowl, then at him, and said what she had never said in front of others. She said she was tired, that every day she decides who lives and who dies, that the advisors are arguing, that the guards are grumbling, that the night cranes are drawing closer, and that she was alone, completely alone. Jiun sat down across from her. He was silent for a moment. Then he said she wasn't alone, that he was there, that he didn't rule or wage war, but he provided food, and as long as he provided food, she didn't need to worry about feeding 12,000 people. He'd take care of that part. She ruled. He provided food. They'd divided the work. She looked at him. Her mask-like face cracked. Her lips trembled. She lowered her head. Her hair fell across her face. Her shoulders shook slightly. She was crying, silently, for the first time in 5 years. He didn't touch her, didn't hug her, didn't comfort her with words. He just sat beside her while she cried. Then she raised her head, wiped her face, picked up a spoon, and began to eat the soup. The 9th month, the first direct confrontation with the night cranes. Their commander, Hwang Gi-chol, 45 years old. He was smarter than anyone Jiun had ever met in this world. He didn't go after caravans. He didn't set up ambushes on the trails. He took a different path. He found a port, a small port in the south of the province. Some of the goods were shipped through it by sea, bypassing the land blockade. Fishing boats set out at night and sailed along the coast to Mushon. Gihol found this out through a front man. The man bought fish sauce in Mushon and traced the pot back. He set a trap. 3 military junks hid in a cove near the southern port. They waited for the caravan. Jiun found out a day later, so her records. She noticed that one merchant in Mushon was asking too many questions, the right questions, the kind asked not by a buyer but by an investigator. She informed Jiun. He changed his plans within 12 hours. The caravan did not pass through the port. Instead, Jiun sent empty boats through the port equipped with lanterns, with people on deck, but without any cargo. The cargo was traveling through the mountain pass at that time via the old Han route, the one that had been in use from the very beginning. Gihol took the empty boats. He searched them. Nothing. He stood on the deck of the junk and looked out at the horizon. He realized he'd been outmaneuvered. But he didn't get angry. He smiled, because a smile is an acknowledgement of a worthy opponent. The 10th month. Through intermediaries, Jiun learned the name of the man hunting him, Hwang Gi-chol, leader of the night cranes. He gathered information through monks, through beggars, through So-hee, who, using her father's old connections, obtained his service record. 20 years of service, 3 conspiracies uncovered, 2 uprisings quelled. A man who believed in the empire, sincerely, not for personal gain, out of conviction. Jiun thought about him at night. He was the first opponent Jiun respected. He wasn't afraid of him, respected, because Gi-chol was consistent. He defended the world he knew, a world in which the central authority both provided for and punished its people, a world in which chaos would ensue without the emperor. He was wrong, but he was honest in his error. The 11th month. So Yun-hee's child was born, a boy, healthy, crying loudly. Jiun was in the provincial capital that night. He stood outside the door and listened to the cry. Then silence. Then another cry, a faint one, a new one. The first breath, the midwife came out. She said it was a boy, that the mother was alive, that everything was fine. Jiun went in an hour later. So Young-hee was lying on pillows, pale, exhausted, but alive. The baby was lying next to her, red, wrinkled, tiny. Jiun stood and watched. Then he went to the kitchen. He made broth for 3 hours, chicken broth over low heat, with ginger, with jujubes, with chestnuts. A recipe that in his world was prepared for new mothers. Samgatan. Restorative. He brought it to So Yun-hee. She drank it in sips, slowly. Then she looked at the baby, then at Jiun, and handed the infant to him, silently. He took it, carefully, a tiny body, warm, weightless. The boy opened his eyes, cloudy, meaningless, but alive. And then So Yun-hee told him the truth, quietly, so no one would hear. She said that the child's father was not her late husband. The child's father was the current emperor's older brother, the rightful heir, deposed and murdered 9 years ago. She had been his secret lover. He had hidden her by marrying her off to Governor Manhwa. The child in Ji-yoon's arms, by all the laws of the empire, is the only legitimate emperor. Ji-yoon stood there, holding the infant. The world had changed, quietly, without thunder, without lightning. It had simply become different. He had built a trade network to feed the province. It turned out he was laying the groundwork for the restoration of the dynasty. He looked at the child, then at So Young-hee, and said quietly, "Hello, my name is Ji-yoon. I'll take care of you." After the birth heir, everything accelerated. The emperor found out, no about child, about that Yunhua didn't just but thrives. Products from Yunhua appeared on tables the great houses, in secret, for gold. Each pot of kimchi and every bottle of sauce had a crack in the imperial monopoly. The aristocrats who purchased Yunhua products became addicted, not regardless of Yunhua, on taste, from quality, from what that after Yunhua cuisine imperial food seemed bland and lifeless. The emperor ordered to send an army, 30,000 swords. General Baek Hyun-woo, veteran, tough, decisive. The army set out toward southeast, toward the walls of the city Yunhua. Ji-yoon learned about 10 days before their arrival. Soki, her network, merchants in capital who sold Yunhua. The troops heard the news before the messengers did. 10 days, not long, but long enough. Ji-yoon convened a council with Yun-hee, chief of the guard Cho Mun-so, advisor Kwon Ho-shik, So-hee, Da-sum, Ha-in, everyone. He spread out the map. 30,000 soldiers against Yunhua's 3,000 guards. A head-on assault would be impossible to withstand, but a head-on assault wasn't necessary. Mun-so spoke of walls, of defenses, of positions. Ho-shik spoke of negotiations, of surrender on certain terms. Il-hwan, through his daughter, conveyed that the guild was ready to mediate if it were guaranteed privileges afterward. Ji-yoon listened. Then he spoke. He said that an army is 30,000 mouths to feed, 30,000 people who eat 3 times a day. The Imperial Army's supply train stretches for 2 days' journey: grain, meat, water, firewood, horse fodder. An army fights on a full stomach. On an empty stomach, an army mutinies. Mun-so looked at him. He understood. He smiled for the first time ever, predator-like, like a soldier. Ji-yoon continued. He wasn't suggesting cutting off the supply trains. That's war. That's bloodshed. He was suggesting something else. Let the army come. Let them stand at the walls. Let them lay siege. And Yunhua will do one thing. Eat. Openly, loudly, deliciously. While the army subsists on meager rations and stale flatbreads, outside the walls, they'll be grilling fish, cooking soup, and baking flatbreads with kimchi. The smell will waft through the walls. The soldiers will smell it. Soldiers aren't generals. Soldiers are peasants who are taken from their villages and clad in armor. They're hungry. They're tired. They don't want to fight. They want to eat. So Yunhua listened. Her face was impassive. Then she nodded. The next 10 days were madness. Ji-yoon didn't sleep. He redirected all the network's resources. All 20 villages worked toward a single goal: stockpiling as much as possible. Salt everything that could be salted. Ferment everything that could be fermented. Everything that could be dried was dried. Caravans traveled day and night. Every route was operating at full capacity. The warehouses filled up. Da-sum commanded 30 cooks. She prepared provisions that could be stored for months and reheated in a minute. Rice balls stuffed with kimchi, dried fish glazed with honey, bean paste with mushrooms. ginger tea in sealed jars. Hyun led the caravans across the pass without stopping. 3 trips a week. She lost weight, she grew gaunt, but she kept going. Once, Ji-yoon told her she could rest. She looked at him, she said nothing, she walked out, and led the next caravan. Min-ae helped Dasum in the kitchen. She counted sacks, she kept records on clay tablets, in neat, childlike handwriting, which Ji-yoon had taught her in 2 months. She was as serious as a general. She was 10 years old. The army arrived on the 12th day after the order was given. 30,000 men set up camp before the city walls. The tents stretched to the horizon. Bonfires smoldered, banners fluttered in the wind. General Baek-hyun sent a messenger, a demand to surrender. So Yun-hee refused, calmly, polite, as befits a noble lady. The siege began, and Ji-yoon began his war, without swords, without arrows, without blood. Every evening, braziers were lit on the city walls. Soup simmered in the braziers, made from fish, from seaweed, with kimchi, with noodles. The aroma drifted over the walls, across the field, through the tents, straight into the nostrils of the soldiers who were eating soggy rice and salty beans. Every morning, baskets appeared at the city gates, filled with rice balls, with dried fish, with little pots of tea. Not for the general, for the soldiers, with a note, "Help yourselves." "We feed everyone." The general ordered them to be thrown away. The soldiers obeyed. On the first day, on the second, on the third day, one soldier secretly took a ball. He tasted it. He told a comrade. On the 5th day, half the advance guard was eating Manhwa balls while hiding behind the tents. On the 10th day, they stopped hiding it. The general was furious, but he couldn't stop 30,000 hungry people from eating. The supply train was falling behind. The roads had been washed out by rain. The grain in the supply train had gotten wet. The meat had gone bad. The foragers went out to find feed for the horses and returned empty-handed because the surrounding villages were empty, not ravaged, empty. The residents had fled behind the walls of Manhwa. They'd taken everything, down to the last grain. Ji-yoon had organized this a week before the army arrived. An evacuation, 12 villages, 4,000 people. All inside the walls, all well-fed, all housed. Everyone was working. Because he knew that a siege wasn't about walls. A siege was about food. Whoever eats wins. 30 days. The army stood its ground. Manhwa stood its ground. The general sent messengers to the emperor asking him to send provisions. The emperor sent orders to attack. The general looked at the well-fed city behind the walls and at his starving soldiers and realized that an assault would be a disaster. Starving soldiers don't scale walls. Starving soldiers drop their weapons and run. 60 days. Desertion. First, one by one, then in groups. The soldiers left at night. They abandoned their armor. They went home, to their families, to the fields that had no one to plow them because the farmers were standing beneath foreign walls. 90 days. The army had lost a third of its men. Those who remained were shadows, gaunt, angry. Not at Manhwa, at the emperor who had sent them here and forgotten them. 100 days. Hyun brought back intelligence. A supply train traveling from the capital had been intercepted, not by Manhwa, but by the province of Mucheon. Mucheon had openly broken with the emperor. Behind it stood Pyeongtaun. 2 allies. 2 blows to the back. The empire was cracking. 120 days. On one first day of the siege, June began before dawn. Silence, so that not wake up Min-ae. She was a small room next to him, in the governor's wife. She was a separate room 2 months ago. She set her the bed a sign with inscription, "Room number 1." This was a joke, the first joke she came up with, all by... He went out onto porch. The city was asleep. Behind the walls in the pre-dawn mists stood army that was from remains. 20,000, maybe less. He stood and breathed the cold morning air. It smelled of the sea. It smelled smoke from nighttime bonfires. And something else. Kimchi. Dasum had woke up. She was in the kitchen. She always used to anyone else. He went to her. She was by the boiler and stirred the soup. She turned around. She looked. She said that he wasn't. He didn't argue. He sat on the bench and said that he needed 50 carts of food, hot, ready to eat for serve. Soup made fish with rice, kimchi, rice balls, ginger tea, 20,000 servings. Dasum took a look at him, then at the kettle, then again to it. She asked when. He replied by noon. She swore. At length. Creatively. With mention of the ancestors of the cauldron and the lineage of the ladle. Then I tied tighter and began to give orders. 30 cooks, 20 assistants, all kitchens in the city, all supplies, all there is. We worked. June went to sew Yeon-hee. She had asleep. She was her son. The boy was 3 months old, chubby, healthy, cheeks like peaches. He ate greedily and loudly smacked his lips. With Yeon-hee raised her eyes. Ji-yoon said to his plan. She listened. Her didn't change. When he finished, she asked one thing. He is sure? He replied that yes. She nodded. He went to Moon-so. The mother was standing on the wall and looked at the enemy's camp. June stood beside him. He said that by noon he would need 50 carts at the gate, with guards, but without weapons, no swords, without spears, no armor, people in plain clothing. Moon-so turned around. He looked at him, then down, at camp, then again to June-na. He said that he crazy. June didn't argue. Moon-so grunted and went to give orders. By noon, the city Manhwa opened, slowly, with a heavy creak. The imperial camp froze. The soldiers sprang their weapons. The officers jumped to their feet. General Park Hyun-woo ran out from the tent. Through the gate drove out the first cart, behind it the second, the third, the 10th, the 20th, 50th. 50 carts, loaded with food, pots of soup, barrels of kimchi, baskets of rice balls, jugs with ginger tea. Ahead walked June, alone, without weapons, in plain clothes. Mina wanted to go with him. He didn't allow it. Kane wanted to go with him. He didn't allow it. With Yeon-hee stood against the wall and watched, her hands on the rock, white from tension. He walked across the field between the town and the camp. 1 to 20,000 armed people. Legs didn't tremble. He was afraid, but he walked on. That was the right thing to do, because everything that he did for the 4 months cycling to this point. At the edge of them, he stopped. General Park Hyun-woo stood in front of him, tall, gray-haired, his face like stone, hand on sword. Behind his behind stood soldiers, thousands, thin, dirty, with empty eyes, with sunken cheeks. They looked at the carts, not at Juna, on the carts. June spoke up, calmly, evenly. He said to the general that his soldiers did not eat hot for 8 days. What caravan plundered by deserters 3 days ago? What tomorrow in the morning 200 people will not get up because that too weak? He said that in the carts food, hot, for everyone, soup made fish and rice, kimchi, rice balls with filling, ginger tea. He said that Yeonhwa feeds everyone, and her and strangers. That's because a hungry person is not an enemy. A hungry person is just a person who wasn't been fed. The general remained silent. He watched. Then he asked what the catch was. June replied that the catch was simple. If the soldiers accept the food, they will not be able tomorrow go to attack. No, because that the food poisoned. It's that the person who ate the bread from another person not be him kill this, an ancient Dan law. The general knew that. He was a soldier 30 years. He knew that the army lives not orders, but faith. Faith his soldier ran out 3 months ago. They stood hereby out of habit, out of fear, not out of faith. He looked at his men. 20,000 eyes were at the carts. 20,000 noses smelled the hot soup. 20,000 empty stomachs were starved. He could order, not take it. He could order to attack. He could execute June right here. But then he had to have explained to his soldiers why he killed a man who brought them food. And this explanation from him did. The general lowered his hand from sword. He turned toward camp, and nothing didn't said. Silence. Then one soldier stood up. He walked over to the wagon. He took a bowl of soup. My hands were shaking. He brought the bowl to his face. He took at the steam and began to eat. After him the second one, third, 10th, the 100th. In an hour the camp was eating. 20,000 people. Fish soup with rice, kimchi, hot ginger tea. In silence, without talking, just the sounds of food, spoons clinking bowls, sips, sighs. Someone was crying, quietly, not because of grief, but because it was the first time in months he'd eaten a hot meal. Jiun stood in the middle of it all. He watched, and he thought about how, back in Seoul, he'd fed 600 restaurants, and here, 20,000 soldiers were eating from bowls on a muddy field, and that it was all the same job, to feed people. General Baek Hyun-woo approached him. He stood beside him. He was silent. Then he said that the withdrawal would begin in 2 hours. Jiun nodded. The general looked at him. He asked who he was. Jiun replied that he was a cook. The general snorted. He didn't believe him, but he didn't argue. He turned and walked toward the tent. 2 hours later, the army began to break camp. Tents were being taken down. Campfires were dying out. Columns stretched out onto the road, westward, toward the capital, toward the emperor, to whom there was nothing left to send. The city of Manhwa was silent. No one shouted, "Victory!" No one celebrated. People stood on the city walls and watched as the army marched away, in silence. Jiun returned through the gate. Mina was standing at the entrance. She rushed toward him, clutched his arm. She didn't cry. She just held on, just like on the first day. Ha-in stood behind her, calm, a bow on her back. She nodded to him, once. Desom stood by the kitchen. Her hands were covered in flour. Her eyes were red. She was smiling, broadly, tearfully. So he stood by the wall, a notepad in her hands. She was taking notes. Even now, she was taking notes. Princess Ji-yeon looked out the window of the pavilion, a tiny figure in white. She waved her hand, timidly, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to. So Yeon-hee stood on the upper wall of the palace, with her son in her arms. The boy was asleep. He didn't know that the world had just changed. Ji-eun climbed up to her, stood beside her. They watched as the last columns disappeared behind the hills. She silently handed him the child. He took him, a tiny body, warm, weightless, the future emperor, 3 months old. He smelled of milk and something pure, something that made you want to live. 2 years later, the capital fell not in battle, but in a line of people waiting. While Manhwa held off the siege, one province after another broke ties with the emperor and joined the trade alliance. Mucheon, Pyeongtan, Hansan, Iryong, Taegwan. 6 provinces, the Great Fair. Open trade without imperial duties, without triple taxes, without the edicts of silence. The capital's aristocrats stopped supporting the emperor, who could not provide for them. The house of Kim was the first to defect. The So house followed, then the rest. The emperor was left alone, in the palace, at an empty table, with cooks who didn't know how to cook. The new order did not begin with a battle. It began with a bowl of soup. Jiun became the shadow minister of trade for the new union, not by title, but in fact. He didn't want power. He wanted a system in which the provinces trade directly, in which fish from the coast reaches mountain villages fresh, in which rice from the valley is sold at a fair price, in which no child goes to bed hungry. He built this system, slowly, brick by brick, just as he had built supply routes in Seoul. Only the scale was different, and the stakes were different. So Yun-hee ruled as regent to the young emperor, calmly, wisely, with a face that was no longer a mask. Hyein led the mountain guard. She defended the mountain passes, silently, reliably, as always. Dasom became the head chef of the new court. Her kitchen was open to everyone, from ministers to cleaning ladies. She said there was no such thing as noble food or common food. There was only food that was tasty and food that wasn't. So he became the head of the Chamber of Commerce. She calculated, she analyzed, she debated. Her father, Il-hwan, came to her a year after the fall of the capital. He asked for a position in the new guild. She gave him a position, not out of revenge, not out of pity, because he was a good merchant, just inflexible. Princess Ji-yun ate 3 times a day, a full bowl each time, without pain, without fear. She became the librarian of the new court, quiet, happy. Mina grew up, not right away, gradually. She was 12 when the capital fell. She stood next to Ji-un in the square of the new palace when the trade alliance was announced, serious, upright, with a clay tablet in her hands. She kept the records, just as he had taught her. She was no longer afraid there would be no food tomorrow. One evening, 3 years after the day he woke up in the clay hut, Ji-un was sitting in the kitchen of the new palace. Late. Everyone had left. The fire in the hearth was dying down. On the table stood a bowl of soup. Simple. Fish, rice, ginger, garlic. The very same soup he'd cooked for Min-ae on that first day. The door creaked. A small figure. A boy. 3 years old. The son of So Young-hee, the future emperor. He wobbled on unsteady legs toward the table. He reached for the bowl of fermented pears sitting on the edge. Ji-un caught him. He picked him up, sat him on his knee, gave him a piece of pear. The boy ate and smacked his lips. Juice dripped down his chin. Ji-un wiped it off with a rag. The boy laughed. Ji-un looked at him and thought of the old man in a hanbok at the gas station at 3 in the morning. About the question. If you could feed an entire country, would you do it? He laughed and said, yes, no question about it. The old man nodded, and he chose him. Not the strongest, not the smartest. The one who, at the gas station cafe at 3 in the morning, made sure the cleaning lady had a proper meal. That was enough. Outside the kitchen window lay the city. Beyond the city lay the countryside. Beyond the countryside lay the country. Somewhere far away, in the most run-down village, a hearth was burning. A pot stood on the hearth. Something was bubbling in the pot, and it smelled so good it made you want to live.